Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cobb County Board of Zoning Appeals. This is a special call meeting today. We've got a special case to be heard. Let me give you a little insight on how we're going to conduct the meeting today. Our first course of business will be, let me introduce our hearing officer. Our hearing officer today will be Bill Rolling. He's the person that will conduct the meeting. He'll tell everybody how to act, when to act, and not what to say, but to get everything on the record. And talking about the record, all testimony will be given either through a microphone, a handheld microphone, or to the podium to my right. And again, we as the hearing people, as we hear the case and people give testimony, we will stop after each testimony. We'll be back to this board to ask questions at that time. If we have no questions, then we'll continue on with the rest of the testimony. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Bill Rolling. Bill will be the officer of the day, and he'll instruct us all on how we're going to conduct it. Bill?
Thank you, Chairman. Both sides have been provided with the procedures on how we proceed today. It's currently set up that there would be an opening statement that each side would have for 3 minutes, and then each side would have 20 minutes for them to be able to present their side. Any cross-examination that they would make of the opposing witness would count against their time and not against that person that would be presenting that witness. And then there would be 3 minutes to close. And in all fairness, both parties have spoken to me regarding additional time. If they can, they could address the board related to that. That would be up to the board whether or not you want to provide them with additional time. I don't know if that was necessarily regarding the opening statements and closing statements or merely the presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Matt Clace is here today for the appellant, Vision Outdoor Media. And David Jernigan is one of the principals of Vision Outdoor. He's here with me as well. And before we get started, as Mr. Rolling mentioned, we'd like to make a motion to extend the presentation time so we have a full and fair opportunity to get to all the critical evidence that we need to get in the record. This case involves 2 separate appeals. There's 22 sign applications. And as you can tell from the lengthy appeal notices we filed, there's lots of issues and arguments in the case. We only have 1 witness, Mr. Jernigan, but we do have 26 documents we would like to briefly discuss and get through and enter in the record. And we just believe that the default presentation times in this case are insufficient. So we would respectfully request that the opening and closing statements be extended from 3 minutes to 7 minutes, and then the presentation time be extended from 20 minutes to 60 minutes for each side. And we believe, having run through this, that this is the minimum amount of time necessary for us to make a full and fair presentation today.
All right, Matthew, that's your comment. I understand Ms. Blair is also going to ask for additional time. Is that correct?
Good afternoon, Debbie Blair on behalf of Cobb County. I will probably need about 30 to 35 minutes for my presentation. The opening and closing statements of 3 minutes are sufficient for my comments.
And that's your request?
Yes.
Okay. All right, back to this board. Obviously, both have asked for additional time. Anybody have any comments on that as far as additional time? Judy?
I don't think that we necessarily need to give them the additional time in the very beginning. We know the ordinance, all of us up here, we know pretty much, and I don't see that why you would need 40 or 30 or whatever per thing, but I'd be glad to on a case by case as he gets to each one if he needs additional. But I'm not for just going ahead and extending the time.
Other comments?
Yeah. I'll weigh in. I think I agree with that. I think I just send, I've read most of the materials at least, and I think all of us have. And 3 minutes, I'm happy with 3 minutes for the opening. I'm not uncomfortable with going for 20, 30 minutes maybe for the full case, but not for a whole hour.
Okay. Other comments? Okay, here's what I think we should do, and I'm just going to make this somewhat in the form of a motion. I think both have asked for additional time in their opening statement, so I'd like to go, rather than 3 minutes, we'll go to 5 minutes on that. As far as what Ms. Williams and Mr. Gunther have suggested, I think we can do that as time goes on. We can grant that or reduce the time or give you a little more time as we're going there. So I'm asking, my suggestion is we go to at least 5 to 7 minutes on the opening comments. Anybody have a problem with that?
5 minutes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes on the opening?
Yeah.
I think we're all in agreement. We'll go 5 minutes on the opening.
That means closing as well, or?
We're going to close in 2.
Until we get to the closing, if there's additional time required at that time, they can ask for it. And of
Okay.
course, we can always make that decision then. So opening comments are going to be 5 minutes on each side. Fair enough? I think that's,
All right, and on the presentation side, there's no decision at this time? And I would suggest to the board, that in order for both sides to be able to pace their presentation, they would need to know how much time they would have to have in order for how quickly they would need to move through it.
It would be my opinion, the standard time on each one, and that's 10 minutes?
It's
isn't it?
20.
20 minutes.
20, yeah.
20 minutes
I-
is sufficient to tell me everything I need to know, I'm
I
sure.
take, okay, well, here, I got a little angle there. Let's go to 30 minutes. Let's kind of split the horse down the middle.
No,
Okay.
I think 20 minutes they can get the point across in 20 minutes.
Well, I'm going to make a motion to go to 30 minutes. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
Okay. All right, let's go to that. 30 minutes or not, so let's all vote on that. Here we go. All right, we'll go to 30 minutes. We'll go to 30 minutes opening and 5 minutes, I'm sorry, 30 minutes presentation time. 5 minutes on the opening. Bill, it's back to you.
Okay. The legal standard to be applied as you go through the process is abuse of discretion. And each side would be able to make their presentation 5 minutes for opening statement and 30 minutes. I will keep track of the time here. I will round down if it goes over to seconds where you have more time. At any point in time, if you want to ask me how much additional time you have, I'll be happy to let you know that, as long as you let me pull out my calculator and make that calculation. Okay.
To go along with that, our young ladies, our secretaries here could also keep the clock going how we can see it.
Yeah.
Can you do the clock?
I actually have that.
Oh, you've
Yeah,
got the
I
clock.
have that.
Okay.
So
Well, we
I'll
can
be
still
running
see it.
that.
Sure, okay.
So,
Madam Secretary. All right, Bill, let's go.
with that, the appellant could go first.
Again, good afternoon. So earlier this year, Vision submitted a total of 22 applications seeking to build signs of varying content, sizes, and locations to the county. County staff verbally denied one application and denied 18 others via email, all on the same ground, that the application sought prohibited off-premise signs. Now, the county didn't process the last 3 applications. So we have 22 applications total, 19 denied, 3 not processed. And we respectfully disagree with the county staff's actions in this regard, and that's why the present appeals were filed. And we thank you for taking the time to hear us out today. What we'll do is give you a brief overview of Vision's business, their applications, and the grounds for the appeals. And then Mr. Jernigan will come up and say a few words, and finally we'll provide you with some additional documents to support our legal arguments. Vision's a small sign company owned by Mr. Jernigan and his partner Dennis DuPont. Both men have decades of experience in the sign business. Mr. Jernigan, as I'm sure he'll mention, as a former vice president and general manager of Lamar Advertising, was responsible for this area here in Metro Atlanta. Lamar operated more signs than anyone in this area, so he's very familiar with it. They specialize in building signs that are underserved, or building signs in areas that are underserved by advertising signs. Mr. Jernigan knows from his time in Lamar that unincorporated Cobb, especially East and South Cobb, could use some more advertising signs. They're in high demand from advertisers who want to get their messages out. Signs are still the most cost-effective way for small businesses and citizens to get their messages to the public. Anyone who has driven through the unincorporated county knows recently that several large LED-style advertising signs have gone up. 2 at SunTrust Park, 1 at the Galleria, 1 at Cobb Energy Center. So it's undisputed that Cobb allows these signs, at least for some. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today. Vision intends to post both commercial and non-commercial messages on its signs. The way that they applied for these signs were for varying specific content, some non-commercial, some commercial. All of the sites at issue are commercially zoned. They maintain commercial uses. They're adjacent to busy thoroughfares. They're compliant with state law. These are all proper sign locations. Some of them will be LED, just like the Cobb Galleria and Brave signs. LED signs allow public safety messages to go up, and Amber Alerts, fugitive information, they're very beneficial to the public in that regard. So earlier this year, they delivered their applications, and Mr. Jernigan will go through that whole process with you. But again, 19 were denied, 18 in writing, 1 was not in writing, never put in writing, and then 3 were not processed. And so I'll just briefly summarize the grounds for appeal that we'll talk about with you today. 4 of the applications have been deemed approved because they were not denied in accordance with the county's own application procedure. The code's very clear, must be a written denial within 30 days, okay? 4 of the applications, there was no written denial within 30 days, and thus those applications should be deemed approved. Second, of the 18 applications that were denied in writing, 8 of them were not even for off-premise signs, but they were denied on that basis because they were allegedly prohibited off-premise signs, but they were for different types of signs, specified very clearly in the applications: official insignia signs, directional signs, freestanding signs. They were not off-premise signs, so that denial is just erroneous as a matter of fact. Third, the sign code is part of the county zoning ordinance, and 4 of the locations are railroad locations. They're on railroad right-of-ways that are unzoned property, and so the sign code does not even apply to these locations and should not have been denied. Fourth, 15 of the applications specifically sought non-commercial messages. Off-premise sign is defined as a sign for certain businesses, okay? It does not include non-commercial messages, and therefore the denial on that basis was also erroneous. The remaining arguments are more legal in nature. We believe the code is unconstitutional. We understand the board does not have the power to rule on that issue, but we have noted it for the record. It's specified in our appeal. We also believe that the sign code was not adopted in accordance with zoning procedures law in Georgia. The notices that went out just failed to inform the public what was going on. It just says the county is considering changes to its code, but it doesn't say which code, doesn't say sign code. Anyone who received that notice would have no idea what was going on, so therefore it was too vague to comply with Georgia zoning procedures law. So I guess I'm 22 seconds early. I tried to run through it very quickly, but Mr. Jernigan is available to start his testimony if you all are. Oh, okay, I understand.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Blair again on behalf of Cobb County. You are here today to consider whether community development staff abused their discretion when they denied 21 submitted sign permit applications for off-premises signs and rejected 1 incomplete application which was presented in person. You all have had an opportunity to review the appeals. Appellants raised several challenges to these decisions. Some of those challenges will not be addressed by you today. Whether the sign code was properly adopted by the Board of Commissioners and whether the code is unconstitutional are not before you. You must assume, and it is correct, that the code as written is constitutional and lawful. The question before you today is whether staff properly applied the code as it is written. Vision contends that community development improperly rejected applications which requested sign types other than off-premises signs. They contend that the code does not even apply to the railroad properties, that the applications proposing non-commercial messages should not have been rejected, and that 4 applications were not rejected in conformance with the code and should therefore be deemed approved. However, all of these challenges should fail. Let me say first, Cobb's sign code is not easy. It requires quite a bit of cross-referencing to determine what is what. I can understand how Vision misconstrued several of its provisions. but our staff are experts at what they do, and they know the code. It will be shown that the signs labeled by Vision as other than off-premises signs were in fact off-premises signs under the interpretation of the code. It will be shown that the railroad properties are indeed zoned properties and subject to the code. We will show that the denials of the applications proposing non-commercial messages were proper, that county staff did take action and send written denials for the railroad applications, and because the application of 4249 was incomplete, it was proper to return it to the applicant. The standard of review today to be applied is whether community development abused its discretion, whether it erred when denying the 21 signed permits and rejecting an incomplete application. Staff reviewed the applications accepted in compliance with the definitions and requirements of the code. Staff's decision to not accept an incomplete application was proper and also comports with the code. I ask that you uphold the decisions of community development.
Mr. Klaus, am I pronouncing that correctly? Claes, I'm sorry, Mr. Claes. Present your part.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
John David Jernigan.
And how are you affiliated with the appellant Vision Outdoor?
I'm a partner.
Could you please just tell me very briefly a little bit about your background in the sign industry and how you came to know Mr. DuPont?
Sure. I've been in the industry since 1992. Used to run one of the largest outdoor companies here in Georgia, here in Metro Atlanta. And at that time, met Mr. DuPont as we both served on the Outdoor Advertising Association of Georgia board, both as president and vice president and other capacities.
Okay, and what type of signs does Vision Outdoor build?
Advertising signs to help businesses get their message out, non-commercial signs, just signs to be able to get a message out depending on what needs to get out.
Okay. And tell me how you went about investigating the county and submitting your application.
We spent days and hours and weeks riding around the county and identifying locations where signs were not, there weren't many, and there's been a need for signs based on my experience in working in this area for many years. I've had several requests of advertisers, please, I wish we could get signs in these particular areas, especially in East Cobb and South Cobb. And so we identified areas that met with all the normal requirements.
Right. And did you review the Cobb County sign ordinance before you applied?
Yes.
And what did you notice about it?
I noticed that it actually allowed signs and the types of signs that we were pursuing to get messages out, and that it actually didn't. It was confusing to me in terms of off-premise signage, and when I saw other signage going up that clearly was off-premise, even though it didn't, according to the code, did not do that, I was in disagreement with that, and so we chose different signs or different types of signs to advertise with.
Okay. In front of you is our exhibits. If you look at Vision 1 and tell me if that's the initial application you submitted?
It is.
Okay, for 4249 Roswell Road?
Yes.
Okay, and can you run through it real quick and tell me what documents are in there?
Sure. It's the original checklist. It's the application, the permission from the landowner to allow us to apply, authorization for the county to enter the property, business license, color renderings, all of the things that are requested by the county to include, the DOT application, the actual site plans, stamped site plans, along with the engineered plans, as well as, I think there was one or two other things here. There's quite a bit of information. the multi-message when it was applicable.
Is that application package, Exhibit 1, identical to what you submitted when you went in to visit the county office?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And tell me what happened when you went in to apply for that permit.
I went in and actually spoke to two individuals, Mr. Wells and I believe a Miss Bates, and began to go over the application with them in person, which it's explained online to do it on person or online. So I went in person. And in doing so, I began to explain what I was doing, and they said, we don't take this type of application. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, we're not able to do that because this is referred to as an off-premise sign. And I said, okay, well, so are you telling me that, that you're not gonna grant me this permit? And the answer was yes. I said, okay, well, can you deny it? And they said, no, they wouldn't do that in writing. And I said, okay, well, so didn't really understand that. And then it was explained to me that they don't do off-premise signage. And I said, so you're not going to put it in writing? And they said, no. And I said, so I assume that I'm denied. And they said, yes.
Did they ever tell you that the application was incomplete?
No, not at all.
Okay. And did you work hard to make sure that all materials required by the code were submitted with that application?
Very, very hard. Went to a lot of expense and a lot of time putting all this together, dealing with all the requirements from stamp drawings to stamp surveys, all the requested sizes and whatnot, and meeting all of that. Business licenses, all the applications and requirements.
Did you attempt to submit any additional applications in person to the county?
I did. When that location and that sign was denied verbally, I decided to submit the others that I had on hand at the time remaining. And when I went in with a larger stack, it was told to me that they weren't going to accept them. And I said, okay, I don't understand, again, because I had been, it says clearly online that, you could do it in person or online. And so they did not want to accept these, and it was explained to me that we needed to submit them online if I wanted a response. And I explained again that I couldn't, I did it in person because they were huge, large documents, and I said, okay, and they said, if you leave them here, they're not going to be processed and they're going to be thrown away. And obviously, with all the effort and expense that I had gone to, I didn't want that to happen. So they did not accept those, and they said they needed to be done online, which I did over the next few days and submitted them.
Okay. And how many applications did you submit online?
The total was 18.
Okay. And were any applications, were you able to not submit them online? Would they not take them?
Yes. They were actually, and thank you for clarifying that, they were actually 14. We were trying to submit 18, but 14 were submitted online. The other 4, it didn't allow us on the railroad properties because there were not partial identification numbers. It wouldn't accept them. And so without that, we felt like it was important to submit those separately, which we did.
Okay. And after you submitted them online, did you send hard copies to the county?
Yes, we did. We followed up with hard copies when we were sending the 4 that were not able to be submitted online. We explained that was the case, and just because it was a lot of information and a lot of moving parts, we wanted to be clear and submit everything.
And you submitted that via Federal Express?
Yes, I
And
did.
we saw a box earlier here today, a big, thick box. Does that look like the package you submitted?
It does.
And I think that's been put in the record over there. Is that correct? Okay. What happened to the applications you submitted online?
Soon after we began to submit the ones that were processed and accepted online, they began to be denied.
Because of prohibited off-premise signs?
All of the denials were denied because they were prohibited off-premise signs.
Even though some of them were not for off-premise signs?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you ever receive any decision on the railroad applications?
Out of the 4 that we submitted, we did receive a response back denying one of those for the same reason, and then the other 3, we never received any response back.
Mr. Clace, I'm sorry, could you just hold your microphone a little bit closer up for, it's being recorded and this is on television too, and it's hard to hear you.
Okay, I'll apologize. I'll try it again. Did you ever submit any additional applications to the county after the initial first few submissions?
Yes, we did.
How many?
3.
Okay, and what happened to those?
They were denied.
For the same reason, off-premise sign prohibited?
Yes.
Any other reasons?
No.
Do you ever receive any notification from the county that any of the applications were incomplete?
No.
Okay. I want to show you some exhibits which are in front of you, marked as exhibits 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16.
Okay, I'll see them.
And if you could just run through these and tell me what they are. I want to see if I can't put them over here on the projector.
Sure. Exhibit 12 is a list of the applications that were submitted.
Okay. So all 22 applications?
Yes, all 22 applications. This is a list.
Okay. What about exhibit 13?
These are the 4 applications that were, they were not given a timely denial.
Okay.
Other than the first one, which was denied verbally.
But you never received a written denial on that first one?
That's correct.
Okay, and you never received written denials on those 3 other applications listed?
That is correct.
Okay. What about exhibit 14?
Exhibit 14 is a list of signs that were applied for that they were applied for and they were not off-premise signs per se.
Okay, and then under sign type on exhibit 14, does that accurately represent the types of signs that were applied for?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so some were freestanding signs, some were official insignia signs, some were directional signs?
Correct.
Exhibit 15, what does that represent?
These are the 4 railroad properties that are in unzoned areas.
Okay. And so
They were applied for.
it's your position that because they're unzoned, the zoning regulations don't apply to those properties?
That is my position, yes.
And then what about exhibit 16?
These are signs that are not, that were applied for, that were not going to be advertising businesses. So they would be support our troops, things like railroad safety, ministries, the Georgia flag, pregnancy centers, that type of thing, hospitals, special seals.
Okay, so these were not businesses that you were seeking to advertise?
That is correct.
Just real quick, could you leaf through exhibits 2 through 11 there in front of you and just let me know if those are true and correct copies of what they purport to be?
Sure. Do you want me to go through and explain what they are?
Just very briefly, what's exhibit 2?
Exhibit 2 is the letter written to Mr. Wells after when I couldn't submit the applications online and was able to submit all of these at one time when I overnighted the package.
Okay. What about exhibit 3?
That is the acceptance of the overnighted package via Federal Express,
Okay.
the confirmation.
What about exhibit 5?
5 is the multiple letters of denial on many of the applications.
Okay. What about exhibits 6 and 7? What are those?
6 and 7 is another letter written to Mr. Wells, and also the confirmation of what I overnighted when the locations in terms of the railroad could not be submitted because of the parcel identification. These were submitted separately.
Okay, and exhibits 8 through 10, what do those represent?
8, 9, and 10 are the 3 additional locations that were submitted after the fact,
Okay,
after the initial ones.
okay. And those were all uploaded online?
Yes, they were.
And are those true and accurate copies of what was uploaded online there in exhibits 8 through 10?
Exhibits 8 through 10, they do appear to be full and accurate, yes.
Okay. What else would you like the board to be aware of today?
You know, we come before you today to just, we would love to do business in this area. I have been in the business a long time and have worked with many, many advertisers in my previous experience, and, you know, found that there is clearly a need for these types of signs. I was a bit confused in the application process that, you know, when it was talking about off-premise, you know, official insignia, it was contradictory to me and confusing when I'd seen these other signs that had recently gone up that you referred to earlier. I mean, the Braves and the Galleria and the Cobb Energy Center. And we just want to be involved in the community. There's clearly it's a win situation to be able to get messages out, produce tax revenue for the county. The businesses need that. The landowners were very, very excited about having the opportunity to have revenue produced on their property from a very small area that we would lease from them. And we just want to work with the county, and we feel that you know, what has happened is not right, and it's the ordinance we're very concerned with and has problems, and we feel like it's just not fair and not constitutional, and we're more than willing to work with the county if there's some areas that are specific that are you know, that you're concerned with. But we want to do business in Cobb County, and we hope you guys will see it through for us to be able to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jernigan. All I have now.
Ms. Blair, you have questions? Mr. Klaus, you have 15 minutes left on your presentation.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
I have some exhibits in the large binder there.
Okay.
And I'd like if you could look at a couple of them for me.
Sure.
If you could pull out Exhibit E. There's several renderings there that were included with your sign presentation, or your sign applications, excuse me.
Okay.
E. Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at E3, I believe it has the official flag of Georgia on it.
Okay.
You understand that if the signs were approved as official flags, it is an exception to the code, and that sign face would need to remain as the exempted material. Did you understand that?
I understand that you're saying that, yes.
Okay. That sign, if you look at the actual application that came, or that was attached with that sign, is requesting a digital sign, which of course, as I understand it, has several, it flashes through and you can show several different messages on it.
It has that ability, yes.
So I guess my question is, if it is an exempted, if you're applying for the sign permit as an exempted, and it's an exemption to the sign code, but you're putting it on as an electronic sign, why would Vision spend that much money to have a flag shown?
Right. Well, granted, that would be, in my experience, it would probably be a little bit more difficult to sell. But I have worked in communities where we do all types of public service or show types of messages that are not very obvious, that they are a message that maybe a normal sign that you would see that is very obvious that way, but it would be more difficult to do. But again, we wouldn't have spent this much time and this much effort and this much money preparing all of these if we didn't have a strategy. And I've been in the sales of outdoor advertising and management and development for 26 years, and granted, it would be, I think, to your point, a little bit more difficult to do that, but we wouldn't have spent all that money to be able to do it, or
Okay.
to not be able to produce some revenue.
And may I ask you to pull out 2 additional exhibits, D1 and C4.
Okay, D1 and C4.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I didn't.
That's all right.
I didn't know they
That's
were
all right.
clipped together there.
That's okay. All right, I have both here.
So the application for Cobb D1 applied for a directional sign.
Mhm.
The application for C4 was a freestanding sign. Are those not the same rendering for the ministries?
It appears to be the same message that we put up there for the display for what you guys asked for. Yes, it is. It's the same picture of the same
Right.
message that is up
So
there.
my question is it directional or is it freestanding? Because it was applied for in 2 different methods.
Yeah, I'd need to look a little closer. I haven't looked, again, there were a lot of applications, and I'd have to go back and look, but to me, it actually shows exactly where the location is. So to me, that is definitely giving directions of where it is. And then the other one being a freestanding sign is just that, a freestanding sign. So I believe that it could be both.
Okay. And one last question, please. When you were at the counter initially, I believe that was March 22nd, and you brought the first sign application in 4249, and you
Sure.
spoke with Donald and Tanisha, Mr. Wells and Ms. Bates.
Right.
Did one of them not discuss with you the 3-to-1 takedown for billboards?
When I was leaving, they did mention that, yes.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Claus, do you have follow-up, or,
I don't have follow-up from Mr. Jernigan, but I would like to get some additional evidence in there.
okay. Before we do that, if we may, the board has an opportunity to ask questions if they want to, and that might clarify some of that. And this does not count against your time. Okay.
All right, it's back to this board for comments, questions. Is there any questions from fellow members of the board? I've got a couple. First of all, tell me what an off-premise sign is. Tell us what an off-premise sign is.
An off-premise,
I was just gonna, do you mean pursuant to the code or in his own words?
In his own words, yes, fine.
yeah. An off-premise sign is a sign that can produce messages, whether that be, types of messages, whether it be hospitals, whether it be public service, whether it be directionals. An off-premise sign is a sign that can advertise a number of different things.
Well, what is the word premise, off-premise? So if the sign is on a McDonald's hamburger lot, for an example, and it's advertising a hospital, is that called an off-premise sign? I'm trying to get the word premise.
Yeah, it could be referred to as that, yes.
Well, my other question would be, what's a non-commercial sign? Is that, for an example, support our troops? Is that a non-commercial sign?
Yes.
And then I heard the railroad zoned, and I'm not quite sure I quite understand that. Does that mean that all the railroad property is not zoned, or it is zoned?
It's my belief that a railroad right-of-way, if you will, is not zoned, it's unzoned.
And do I understand that when you come in for an application, you have to put a parcel number on that application?
That is correct.
And if it's a non-zone railroad property, would there be a parcel number?
Apparently not, because in doing the research for that, it did not have any parcel numbers, and that was the way that the application read, to include a parcel identification number, and because it didn't have one, that was why we couldn't fully complete those 4 online, and why we sent them directly, the actual hard copies to the county.
Okay. Mr. Gunther has a question.
So I just want to go to these, several of these signs are similar to something like support our troops. That's not a commercial sign, you say, is that right? Not a commercial message?
That is correct.
Somebody's paying for that though, right? Who pays for it?
Well, sometimes it could be us. We could actually put that message up, and there's many, many businesses that I've dealt with over the years that feel passionately about that type of thing and will put that message up and fund
So
it.
they just, you or somebody would just choose to just pay for it and just put it up because they feel that's the right, for whatever reason, that's a good thing for them to do,
Absolutely.
without any reference to their business.
Sometimes it could reference their
And-
business, it could. Sponsored by, for instance.
Okay,
Sponsored by Northside Hospital.
right.
There's a
So,
lot of
and
different
I-
ways to do that.
And this
yes.
may be leading, I don't know, but I would assume that if you don't have any paying customers for a particular sign for a moment, you, as the owner of the sign, could put that message up if you wanted to, just to fill the space. Is that right?
Yes, another example would be doing something we've worked with the Georgia Department of Transportation when weather is coming in, or amber alerts, hurricanes, those types of things. We do that as a public service.
Okay. I've got a question, like I think Chairman does, about railroads and their zoning status. Yeah, but we'll deal with that, I guess, with the zoning department later. Okay.
I have one other follow-up question to ask. You had mentioned that the Galleria Center and the Brave Stadium and the Performing Arts Center at Galleria had some signs up. Why did you bring that up?
Because they are clearly advertising messages like I would like to do.
Okay.
And I wasn't really sure why they were allowed to do it and I wasn't.
Okay, I bring that up because if I'm not mistaken, that's controlled by the Exhibit Hall Authority of Cobb County, which is a semi-government organization to their self. So I remember doing the Galleria, and there was never any sign, to my knowledge, there was no sign permits on that. So I think your explanation on those 3 things is different than our zoning department. I think that's a separate issue. They never did get zoning for their signs. They just had their own authority, and it was through the Exhibit Hall Authority, who owns the Galleria, owns the Brave Stadium, and owns the Performing Arts Center. So that's a separate government entity by itself.
And again, that's possible, and sounds like it is. That being said, we do for one,
I understand.
Yeah, okay.
I think I'm trying to be fair to everybody.
I understand.
And I wanted to get that on the record. That's my opinion, and I think I'm pretty
So
correct.
are you suggesting then that those signs do not come under the jurisdiction of Cobb County government?
They did not,
Code?
to my understanding, they did not come under
Yeah,
Cobb
okay.
County government at the time they were approved.
Yeah, okay.
They were all approved through the Exhibit Hall Authority, not through Cobb County.
And
Any other questions for
yeah,
me?
I just want to make a quick comment. I don't want you to get me wrong. I think messages like support our troops are really good.
Okay, I have,
Thank you.
Mr. McDaniel has a question.
Actually, I got a couple, maybe three. David, what, in your comments, you mentioned that you'd seen a lot of opportunities as you drove Cobb and identified these locations. I'm just wondering, why do you suppose there aren't billboards in those locations in a lot of these areas that you identified?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't, they should be. You just want my opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I presume it's a competitive industry, and so I'm just kind of curious to know why, you'd think that you've hit all this virgin landscape that there's no billboards on. Why would that ever be the case? I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I mean, I could make plenty of assumptions with things changing over the years, but as areas grow and things change and things get developed, all of the areas that I was looking at, I was mainly trying to make sure that it was, high traffic count areas, good visibility, and have, the ability to be seen and conform to the state codes, the state spacing, those type of things that normal advertising signs do. But there could probably be, it would just merely be opinion
Right.
at that point. It
Okay.
could be a number of reasons.
Kind of follow up on that one, and that would be, why do you suppose the county adopted that 3-to-1 takedown rule on off-premise signs?
Yeah, I mean, that was mentioned to me, when I was there on the way out, and he asked if I had any signs to be able to take down, and my answer was no, which, got me to be thinking about, okay, so, and I used to work for one of these big companies. So when you have a lot of inventory out there, you have the ability to do different things. And I just felt like that wasn't, that didn't seem right. But he
Is
did
it
bring
unconstitutional, or what do you mean not right? What?
I don't, I mean, I'm not sure in terms of the constitutionality. I defer to my legal counsel on
Okay.
that, but, so
Okay.
I hope I've answered your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
One last question, and I appreciated your comments about wanting to work with the county on the opportunities that you saw. I'm just curious, have you reached out to somebody to kind of work with them then on some ideas that you have?
In terms of landowners or,
Well, just this whole opportunity that you identified, and you indicated a willingness to work with the county in some of the opening comments. And I'm just wondering, who might you have reached out to, or have you made some effort to
Sure.
do that?
Sure. Well, when we had submitted these applications and explained that we felt like they were, for miscellaneous reasons, why they were denied and whatnot, we felt like maybe we could get together and talk, and we met with the county council here and discussed ideas, maybe if there were any hot buttons or there's some areas, and we explained to them several ideas that we had to work with them, if whether it be to move locations to a different area, if there was a particular part of the county that was especially sensitive, something that I was not aware of. So we did explain that information at that meeting and in some letters and whatnot as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
You had mentioned the 3 signs, and you could take one down. Mr. Wells had mentioned that to you, is that correct?
He had mentioned it, yes.
I'm glad to hear that, because he's trying to do the right thing and help you. And that shows that he did try to help you with that information. Ms. Williams.
I think it would be safe to say the bottom line is it's about money. Is that correct?
The bottom line is
It's not really the needs, I don't think, because we've done really well over the years without all those billboards and all those.
yeah,
But I'm going for you, would be safe to say that it's about you get paid per sign?
we just want to do business.
But in that, you get paid. Is that how you make your money?
Well, I sure hope so.
Okay, so you get paid.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter
Democracy.
about the ordinance or what the people are feeling. You get paid per sign that you put up.
No,
And you knew this sign when you came in, the ordinance when you came into Cobb?
we had definitely reviewed the ordinance in detail before we moved in.
So,
I
yeah.
mean, but yes,
So when you went to the different places and then you made your presentation, it was with the expectation that you were going to get turned down?
no.
You thought, reading the sign ordinance, that you were going to get approved on all 21 signs?
I sure hope so, yes,
You hope so, but did you really think so
yes,
after reading the ordinance?
yes.
And
Because I felt like it was not correct and not,
you felt like it's not correct.
right.
Right.
And my legal counsel after discussing it with them.
And then y'all brought the other two in order to make this appeal, is that correct?
The other two, I'm
The
sorry.
other 20, you brought all of them in order to get to this point we're at today. If
I'm
they
not
had
sure I
told you
understand the
no,
question.
if they had told you no on 1 application, 2 application, 3 application, but you kept bringing them in,
Mhm.
was that to get to the point where you could appeal it or work, as you said, work with someone if our ordinance wasn't right?
Yeah, I brought the initial application in for review to make sure I hadn't missed anything.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no discussion at all that it was incomplete. They just said that they wouldn't accept it, and then they were denying it. When I asked to put it in writing, they said they wouldn't. And then I said, well, that doesn't seem right, and so I decided to go ahead. I didn't want to come in with some big box and just throw it on the county. I mean, it was a busy place,
You're
and
right.
so I was trying to respect their time in doing so. And then I wanted to go ahead and bring the other remaining ones in.
And how many other counties have you challenged their sign ordinance?
I've worked in counties all over the Atlanta area and all over the country with plenty of development and applications. Have there been any that I've had disagreements with? Of course. It's not always you get along just because you're nice, but we usually have had very, very good success. Just recently built a sign up in Ackworth, and developed a sign there and worked with them. And
Where would that location be? Is that in the city?
it's in the city limits of Ackworth,
And
yes, ma'am.
whereabouts would it be in?
Right near Ackworth due West Road. There's a shopping center there, commercial area, 4-lane highway by
Kroger, where the Kroger shopping center?
it's very close to the Kroger by
The
the
Target.
Moe's
Oh, yeah. okay.
Mexican Grill.
And
Yes,
so you
ma'am.
did one up there, which is in a really congested area?
It's in a very, very much commercial area.
Yeah,
Mhm.
of the area. Okay. And did you find our staff professional when you dealt with them?
Yes.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Skip?
Go ahead.
No.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that, this 3-for-1 takedown. On that initial application that you came in and you gave it to Donald Wells, and he looked at it, and in a professional way, it sounds like, and then told you that it was incomplete.
No, he didn't. He did not say incomplete at all.
What did he say?
He denied the location. He said, we are not going to accept that. We're not going to approve that because you're
Yes.
applying for it as an off-premise advertising sign.
Gotcha, okay, so, but then you did say there's this 3-for-1 takedown dimension to the code.
When I was about to leave, after he had already denied the location verbally, he mentioned that.
So did that mean anything to you? Did you do anything about that?
I really didn't, no, I didn't. It didn't
So you
mean
just sort
much
of-
to me because it had already been denied, and I was kind of trying to wonder why. And so
Okay,
the
but-
3-to-1 or 3-for-1 or whatever that it was given to me after that the location was denied.
So the fact that he mentioned that didn't raise any bells, that maybe there's a problem here you don't understand, and it might make sense to explore that a little bit before you go to the expense of submitting another
I mean,
dozen plus.
Yeah, I mean, I heard what he said, but again, I was more focused on the fact that it had already been denied, and I didn't understand why. And the reasoning he gave was because it was applying for an off-premise advertising sign, which I, again, as mentioned
So-
earlier, don't agree with, and respectfully don't agree with, because I see other signs that are out there that are doing the similar things that I want to do, and I didn't understand how that was happening, why they were able to do it and I wasn't. Does that make sense?
And you're talking about the three in particular, the Braves and the Galleria and so forth, right?
That's,
And
yes.
we may have an explanation for that from what the chairman just brought out. I don't know. But it just would seem to me that if I were doing business and if I were going to submit applications for anything, and somebody said it doesn't satisfy, the code for whatever reason, before I went off and replicated what I had done a whole bunch of times the same way, pretty much sounds like, I would try to understand, I would think, what it is I don't understand. But it doesn't sound like you did that.
Well, actually, all of those applications were already done. As mentioned, we
Okay,
submitted those
you
the
hadn't
same
said that
day.
before. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you kind of thought, well, I don't really understand this, but I've got this work done, so I'm going to submit them anyway and see if something breaks free and something works. Okay, I
Yes.
can understand that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Just one quick follow-up. How many signs do you have in Cobb County now?
At the moment, I don't have any.
See, so the three doesn't apply.
I know.
I just wanted to clear it up. I think he's got a justifiable. Okay, where do we stand? No more questions from this board. It's back to Bill.
And I believe at this point in time, Mr. Clace has some additional questions you want to ask him and also submission of some documentation.
I don't have any additional questions for Mr. Jernigan, but I do have some documents I'd like to go over that I can verify. I'm sure that
You mean with him? You mean for submission or?
You can sit down.
Mr. Jernigan.
Oh, okay.
Leave these up there.
I just want to make a few additional points, and this, I think, goes to the chairman's point about the exemption for the authority. And so that's what we have a problem with, okay? That's one of the reasons why we're here today is, and this is a constitutional issue. It's we're making it for the record, but, we believe it's unfair and we believe it's unconstitutional for the government to be able to do business with private parties and those private parties to make money off of an exemption for signs, and we can't. Everyone should be treated the same. So, I've got some evidence here today just to that point, and I'd like to just go over that. And these are documents we obtained from open records requests. Exhibit 20 here is a letter from the Braves seeking permits for those LED signs out on 75 and 285, and the letter says, please note signs will be owned by the authority and will be located on property owned by the authority and as such are exempt from the Cobb zoning requirements. And so there are permits that were actually issued, but they just said, we're working with them, give us permits. They got their permits. Exhibit 21, another letter that we got from the Cobb Energy Center that said, we said, give us your permits for your sign, and they said, we don't need permits because we're exempt. Same for Exhibit 22, same letter for the Galleria. Exhibit 23 is a portion of a proposal from Clear Channel Outdoor, which is an outdoor advertising company that runs the sign at the Galleria and makes profits on that sign, okay? Competitors of Mr. Jernigan for Vision. So here we have a private entity using this exemption for profit-making purposes, for their benefit. Another one of the issues that we have with the code and everything else. Putting that aside briefly, I want to just turn to our ZPL argument very quickly. Again, making this for the record, understand, you are not going to rule on this issue, but when the county gives notice for a public hearing, which is required by Georgia zoning procedures law, the notice is just too vague to be enforced. Exhibit 24 here is an open records request I submitted to the county asking for copies of all the notices relating to the sign ordinance for the few years prior to the code being adopted. It's my back and forth with the county. And then Exhibit 25 is the notice for the last amendment. And it says, notice of amendment to chapters 626, 30, 34, 50, 54, 62, 90, 122, and 134 of the Code of Cobb County. We're going to consider amendments to those chapters. That doesn't mean anything to anyone. No one knows what chapter 34, chapter 50, chapter 134 means. Chapter 134 is the entire zoning code. I mean, that could be any number of things. Could relate to signs, could relate to anything else. So anyone who gets this notice, it is meaningless to them unless they do a bunch of further investigation. That does not comply with zoning procedures law. You asked earlier about the railroad locations, and Exhibit 26 here is some copies of, maybe I can put this on the overhead. So they submitted several applications that are going to go on railroad right-of-ways, okay? They're going to read to surface streets, but the sign locations themselves will be on railroad right-of-ways. And if you look here, this was printed from the Cobb zoning map. You can see the green stars are the locations, and you see those properties are not zoned. There's no zoning district where those are located. Those are on the right-of-way, so they are between zoning districts.
You better locate where we are on that. Is that 285?
Pardon me? Yeah, this is, it's on either side of 285 on the Norfolk Southern Railway that crosses 285. And those were the sign locations.
Because I got bad eyes. Show me where the railroad goes across there.
Okay. Right here,
Right there, okay. Just want to check.
right.
And that's Norfolk and Southern property, and that has no zoning. And you have signs up there, is that correct? Somebody has signs up there?
Well, there are no signs there. They are proposing to build the signs on that property. They have received permission from Norfolk Southern Railroad to place those signs there. So those were some of the locations they applied for. And we just feel it's not zoned, so the sign regulations, the zoning regulations don't apply. So those railroad locations should not have been denied.
I've got a yes, Mr. Gunther has a question.
I assume at some point, we're going to get somebody from Cobb County zoning, maybe John, to tell us whether that is zoned or not, because I've always thought of a right-of-way as being an overlay on something else, and the something else, and everything in unincorporated Cobb County is zoned one way or the other, right to the middle of the road, I think. I'm not sure about that, but that's my understanding. So if my understanding is correct, then that would be zoned. It would be a right-of-way that's overlaid on top of the zoning, but it's still zoned. At least that would be my perspective.
That's certainly a perspective. It's not our perspective. It might be the county's perspective, but when we looked at the map and we looked at the code and we saw that those properties were not zoned, when they brought their applications to us, we
So
said...
we're going to need to get clarification on that. So, okay.
Yes,
If
ma'am.
your position is that the railroads are not zoned and you want to put the signs on the railroad, then your position would be that you could put your signs every 50 feet, as much right-of-way as the railroad. So you're saying we want to put them all up and down the right-of-ways of the railroads because it's not unzoned?
Well,
Is that your position?
there would be no reason to do that.
But I mean, theoretically,
Well, we'd still have to comply with state law, which the regulations apply regardless of, whether the properties are zoned or not. The state law doesn't regulate by zone, so if they wanted to put signs and they were readable to a state route, like 285, they would have to comply with state spacing, which is,
so with all the railroad right-of-ways we have in Cobb County, they could be all over the county.
theoretically. There's plenty of signs that have been built all along railroads adjacent to routes. It's not uncommon.
All right, thank you.
Bill, let me jump in here a second. Let me ask you, we're kind of getting, in my opinion, I think we're getting a little off track here. Our question before us today is, did Mr. Donald Wells and Mrs. Bates make a decision based on the code? Isn't that the only question that we're being asked today?
That's the only question that you're being asked, but I believe what Mr. Klaus is doing is he has the right now at this point in time to secure his constitutional arguments in the record below. And I believe that's the arguments that he's presenting now, so that they'll be secured when he's presented for, and he has the right to be able to do that.
And I thoroughly understand that. I just want to make sure that we as a board know where we stand on this. What you're getting in the record, I thoroughly understand, but it's a question that's not really before us today. It's a very good question. I think it's a legitimate question, but I don't think that question is a question we can answer today. I just want to clarify that a little bit.
The constitutional, whether the ordinance is constitutional, I agree with you, is not a question you can answer today.
That's correct.
Whether the ordinance violates zoning procedures law, I agree, not a question you can answer. But whether the staff correctly interpreted the zoning and sign code in denying these applications, and we believe that because these railroad locations are on unzoned property, that was a mistake that they made when they denied them. So that issue specifically, I believe, is one you can address.
And we will when we get to it.
Sure. And just for the record, I'd also like to introduce certified copies of the sign code as it existed when Vision's applications were submitted, as well as a certified copy of the 3 most recent amendments to the code directly before the applications were submitted. Both of these certified copies were obtained from the county through an open records request, and I have those here. So they're still stapled, so just supplementing the record, and we would request that all the exhibits 1 through 26 and the certified copies be admitted at this time.
Ms. Blair, have you had an opportunity to review those? Do you have any objection?
I have reviewed them, no objection.
Allow them to be admitted.
Thank you. I'm done at this point. We'll
Hey,
rest,
Mr.
I guess.
And Mr. Clace, you have 10 minutes for cross-examination during Ms. Blair's presentation of her witnesses. Ms. Blair, you have 25 minutes now to start your presentation.
I'd like to call my first witness, Mr. Donald Wells.
Good morning.
It's afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Before I start, I would like to tender the exhibits that I have distributed with the consent of council, which include Cobb exhibits A through J and the position papers that I've distributed.
No objection.
Mr.
No
Wells.
objection. We'll introduce those as part of the record.
Mr. Wells, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state your name for the record.
Donald Wells,
Where are you currently employed?
Cobb County Government and the Zoning Division.
And how long have you been with the county?
I've been with the county, it'll be 15 years in November.
And what is your current position?
Current title is Planner 1.
And how long have you been a Planner 1?
Planner 1 has been past few months, but that's because of the reclassification. It went from zoning analyst to Planner 1. It's just changed the title. Zoning analyst and Planner 1 has been about 5 years.
Okay, wonderful. And what is your educational background?
Just high school.
Okay.
You can hear me?
You can't hear me or him? Just,
I can't hear me either.
okay.
I got you.
Okay. Mr. Wells, what are the two ways that a sign permit application is accepted?
You can submit online or in person.
And what happens when a sign permit application is delivered in person?
In person, we look at it to make sure it just meets minimum code or any glaring issues that we see. If we see anything major, we'll turn it around at that point and say, hey, you got a big issue here. You need to fix that.
So there is a preliminary check to see if it complies with the code, along with whether the actual application package pieces are in there.
Correct, and we make sure every required document, at least the minimum documents, are there. And if any code violations stand out, we will address it right then.
Okay. So if a permit has been received in person and reviewed, what happens next?
So once it's received and it's reviewed and we've gotten it, we will stamp it in with a date stamp, and it will begin our 30-day review period. At that point, the review happens, and we decide on if it's approved or denied.
Okay. And do you have a certain time period in which to review the application?
We do. The code that requires us to make an action on it within 30 days of us accepting it.
Okay. And that 30 days starts when?
We started when we accept it.
Okay. And what happens when a sign permit application is submitted online?
When the applicant submits the application online, it will go through. The system will assign it a permit number. Somebody in the zoning division will just check to verify that it has the minimum standards, just the required documents, dimensional drawings, letter of authorization, business license. Then we will accept it, and it will start the 30-day review calendar or count. And at that point, it will go through the full review to make sure that it's meeting all of the code requirements.
And if it is incomplete, what happens?
We reject it at that moment. We reject it if you're missing documents, or typically the person will reject it at that point.
So the application is just simply rejected if it's not complete?
Correct, it's just incomplete.
Or if it's not compliant with the code?
Or if it's not compliant with the code. At both steps, it could happen at first step or the second.
Does the sign type that is stated on the application control your review of the application?
When we review the application, we look to see what they're asking for. A lot of times, sign companies don't necessarily know what it is that they are asking for or where in our code it is. If we notice that they are asking for something and it's not specifically the code section they're looking at, we will go and look at that section to see if it's eligible to be approved or not, depending on what it is that they're asking for.
And if it doesn't fit what they've requested, is there a next step, or is it simply rejected?
Well, we'll look and see if it fits another part that they weren't aware of. If it does fit another part they're aware of, then we could go ahead and approve it based off of just what the code says. But we typically don't hold them to it. I mean, we'll make the decision on what part of the code section.
Sure. Why was a copy of the application for 4249 Roswell, which was denied at the counter, we're told, not retained?
We never accepted it.
And why was the application not accepted?
Well, just at the initial review of it, we knew that it didn't meet the code as far as the 3-to-1 takedown that would be required for any new billboard type signs or off-premise signs.
And is it correct that the reason an application number was not assigned is because it was not accepted?
That is correct.
And why was a written denial not provided to the applicant?
It's not a normal policy or procedure to issue any type of written denials. If somebody comes and we tell them, no, this sign does not meet the code, we give it back to them. Most sign companies would prefer to get their sign fixed than to wait the time limit for that. I typically try to offer the code section to them, though, if they ask.
Okay. And do you recall if community development received any return emails for the railroad applications, 30, 83, 84, and 85, that showed that it was undeliverable?
No, I wouldn't know that.
No further questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wells.
Hi, good afternoon.
Mr. Clausen, can you hold 1 second, please?
Yes. Could you look at Cobb A1, A2, and A3? Do you have those in front of you?
A1.
Yes. All right.
Okay.
In the to line of those emails, it says dennis@vision-outdoormedia.com. Do you see that?
I do.
Do you know if that's the correct email address?
I do not. Is this a permit that was submitted online?
It would have been a permit that was submitted online, correct?
So this would have been whatever email address the applicant entered in.
Okay. It's just odd because we received every other denial to the correct email address, and we never received these denials. And so are you saying that Mr. DuPont made an error when he uploaded it?
If it was submitted online, we would have never even looked at the email address.
Okay.
It's all automated.
Okay. And you said you never received a return for this?
No, and I don't know what would happen if one was returned. I don't know.
Have you ever had one returned?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. When Mr. Jernigan brought the initial application in for 4249, are you saying you did not accept it?
The one in person?
Yes.
Yes,
You told him it would not be approved, correct?
I'm pretty sure, yes.
Okay, so that's the same thing as denied, right?
It could be, yes.
Okay. Did he ask you to put that in writing?
He did.
And did you refuse?
I offered the copy of the ordinance to him, which is kind of my standard thing.
Okay.
I don't just say you're denied and walk back to my desk.
Okay, so if someone submits an application in person, they're never given a written denial? Is that the county's policy?
At the counter, if we're seeing it, we typically do not, no.
But if they submit it online, they do get a written denial?
And that's because we can't stop it, yes.
Okay. And the code requires a written denial, is that fair?
That is fair.
Okay. And it requires that written denial be submitted within 30 days of the application being submitted?
I believe it says some type of action has to be taken.
Okay. There was some talk earlier about the application for 4249 being incomplete. Was there any materials that it was missing that you can recall?
For an off-premise sign, I believe you have to have that 3-to-1 takedown.
Well, if they're applying for an LED permit to remove 3 existing off-premise signs, but did Mr. Jernigan ever say that he had any inventory, that he was making that kind of application?
I believe he was submitting 4 billboards.
4 billboards?
So I believe, but I don't remember the exact conversation.
Is billboard a defined term in the code?
I'm not sure if it's defined. I could look it up, though.
Okay.
Let you know.
According to the code, what is an off-premise sign?
I'll
Sure.
get a copy of it.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I
Let me pull this out here.
have it off the top of my head. It's 134. You got it?
There you go.
You said you want a definition of off-premise sign?
Yes, off-premise sign.
Okay, yes, the code does define it. You want me to read it?
Well, I'll read it and you tell me if it's right. Off-premise sign means a sign containing a message for a business which is located on a lot that does not contain or otherwise conduct the business for which it is advertised. This shall include, but not be limited to, those signs commonly referred to as billboards. I mean, is it fair to say that under this definition, the sign has to advertise a business to be an off-premise sign?
Say it again. Sorry, the question part.
Is it fair to say that under this definition of off-premise sign, a sign has to contain a message for a business to be an off-premise sign?
It does need to contain a message for business.
Well,
it says it does not contain or otherwise conduct the business for which it is advertised.
Okay, but the message on the sign has to be for a business, right? A sign containing a message for a business which is located on a lot that does not contain or otherwise conduct the business for which is advertised.
Yes, that's what it says.
Okay. Does the sign code regulate non-commercial messages?
It has a section. It has a part for non-commercial messages in the code.
Okay. Can you turn to that for me, because I've not seen it?
I think it's in a special. Let's see.
I mean, I'll represent to you that there used to be an exemption for non-commercial signs, and it was pulled out of the code a couple years ago. At least that's my understanding.
Give me 1 second. I'm sorry. All right. No, we just have an exemption section. And I do not believe it says non-commercial signs.
Okay, so there's, so if some of Vision's applications sought to erect signs bearing non-commercial messages, correct?
I'm
Do you know?
Based off which I've said yes.
Okay, and you classified those signs as off-premise signs, correct?
Correct.
But they weren't advertising a business, correct?
Well, I wouldn't. I didn't review each individual sign, so I wouldn't know that part.
Okay, who did?
Ms. Bates would have been the one to look at each individual permit.
Okay. Is she testifying? No. Okay. And are you aware that all the signs that were denied because they were prohibited off-premise signs?
I am.
But is it fair that some of them were not actually off-premise signs,
I believe they all were off-premise signs.
even though they did not advertise businesses?
I didn't look at every one of them. Standard, billboard companies, they typically advertise their company. So, there's advertising right there.
And when you say billboard, you're just talking about
It's just the
advertising
common-
signs?
It's just what if it's not on the property.
Okay. No further questions at this time.
Mr. Wells, would you please pull out? Oh, sorry. Would you please pull out of the Redwell there, Cobb B,
B,
Exhibit B?
okay.
And what are you looking at?
A sign permit checklist. It's a part of our application.
And if you, I will tell you, if you cross-reference that to the denial letters for the permit numbers, those are for the 3 railroad properties that we allegedly did not send a written notice to. What is the email address on the application checklists?
It is dennis@vision-outdoormedia.com.
And does that match the email address that the emails were sent to in Exhibit A?
It appears that they match.
Are off-premises signs allowed in Cobb County's current code?
They are with the 3-to-1 takedown and the follow that section of the code.
Okay. And do you still have code section 134.311 there in front of you?
311, I do.
And you were talking with Mr. Klass with the off-premise definition?
Mm-hmm.
What does the second sentence of that definition say?
It says, for the purpose of this article, off-premise signs shall not include any sign that is allowed under this article and not requiring a permit or any sign requiring temporary permit under this article. It goes on to say the next sentence, changing the sign face of an off-premise sign will not change the grandfathered or non-conforming status of the sign under this article.
I have the wrong reference, I'm sorry. So let's ignore that question. No further questions. I call Mr. John Peterson, please. Good afternoon, Mr. Peterson. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony before you will be, or before this body today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And please state your name for the record.
John Peterson.
Where are you currently employed?
I'm employed by the Cobb County Zoning Division.
And how long have you been with the county?
I've been with the county for 20 years, 8 years in my current role.
And what is your educational background?
I have a master's degree in public administration.
Do you regularly attend continuing education seminars or conferences?
Yes, I do.
And are you a member of any professional organizations?
Yes, I am.
And what is that, please?
I'm a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, which is part of the American Planning Association.
Okay. And could you please explain what a freestanding sign is under the county code?
A freestanding sign is a sign that's on a property that's not attached to a building or other structure.
And are there any other requirements for a freestanding sign?
The criteria for a freestanding sign are found in the Cobb County Code under on-premise signs, and it regulates such things as the height, the location, and size, among other criteria.
And where would you find that information? Because it is not in the definition itself.
It's not in the definition, it's actually under the section for on-premise signs, which I think is 134-314.
As has been stated, there were several sign applications that were submitted for freestanding signs, but the county denied them as an off-premises sign. Can you explain why something that was applied for, but it was denied differently, please?
Yes. For it to be considered an on-premise sign, it has to meet certain requirements regarding the height and the size of the copy area and the sign structure. And the applications that were submitted did not appear to meet what we had for an on-premise sign. In many cases, they were much taller than the code would allow. In many cases, they had a much larger sign area than the code allowed. And they weren't ground-based monument style signs, which is required in the county code.
Okay. Would you please pull out Exhibit D in the exhibit package? These are photos when you get them out.
It may have been pulled out.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's see, D. There's not a D in here. There's an A. D?
D.
Yeah. I don't
D
see
as
a-
in Debbie.
I don't see a Debbie in this file. Is it G? There does not appear to be one in this folder right here.
Sorry. Sorry about that. These are the photos that were attached to the applications requesting directional signs. Please explain why those sign applications were denied for directional signage.
For a sign to be considered a directional sign, it needs to be approved and reviewed by the County Department of Transportation and also by the Board of Commissioners. And I don't believe either of these were approved by either of those organizations.
But do they appear to fit under anything else in the code?
They appear to be off-premise signs.
And hopefully there's an Exhibit E.
There's not an E in here. Okay. E1, E2, E3,
That's correct.
okay.
Why do the pictures of these official flags, or why do these photos, supposedly official flags or insignias, not meet the exemption in 134-372?
They do not meet the exemption because under our code, you can't have any advertising with an official flag of the state of Georgia or the United States. And these appear, they have the flag of Georgia and the United States, but it also says Vision right underneath it, which is advertising the billboard company. Additionally, when you display a flag in the county that's exempt, it has to meet the flag code. And these signs appear to be static, so these flags cannot be displayed according to the flag code because a flag's supposed to be able to free flow. And these are sections, well, there's, in Exhibit E2, it's a section of the American flag, and in E1, it's the entire Georgia flag, it looks like. But they're not displayed the way a flag should be displayed.
And you mentioned that it was advertising because the name Vision is on the sign itself.
Correct.
If the word Vision was removed, would it fit would it become an acceptable exemption then?
If the word vision was removed, it would not be an exemption, because in our code, a flag is defined as something that's made out of fabric or something pliable. And with these signs right here, it's obvious that the material the flag's on is not pliable or fabric.
Appellant states that only properties that are zoned are subject to the zoning code, so by its terms, the sign ordinance would not apply to properties that are not zoned, such as the railroad properties. How do you respond to that?
Every property in Cobb County is zoned.
Have you confirmed that these specific properties are zoned?
Yes, they're zoned R20 and some other commercial districts.
How or why would the GIS that we were shown not show a zoning on those properties?
The GIS maps that are available online were made about 10 years ago, if my memory serves me correct, and they were made off our original maps, which we had in zoning, which were made out of paper and Mylar. Our original paper map that we have displayed in the zoning office does show these properties as zoned, and every piece of property in Cobb County is zoned.
Would you please pull out Exhibit G, please?
Okay?
Is this a photo of a sign that is necessary for railroad operations?
No, it's not.
And why would you say that?
Railroads and other entities that run transportation networks have their own engineers that figure out what type of signs they need for traffic control. And this does not appear to be made by either the railroad, GDOT, or the Cobb County Department of Transportation.
Are there any other provisions of the code that might address or limit signs similar to this sign?
Yes, there is one provision in the code that prohibits signs that could be confused for official traffic control signs. So this sign would not be allowed because it could be confusing to a driver with the railroad crossing that's near it as to what to do.
No further questions at this time.
I tell you, before John leaves, you're going
He's gonna
to redirect.
Thank you.
Mr. Clace, you have 3 minutes.
All right, Mr. Peterson, when you were testifying, you were talking about some other various reasons as to why some of Vision's applications did not meet the code. Directional sign wasn't approved by the Board of Commissioners. Insignia sign wasn't a pliable material. Were any of those reasons communicated to Vision in the denial letter, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. Doesn't the code require the county, when it denies a permit, to communicate the reasons for denial in writing within 30 days to the applicant?
The code does say it has to be transmitted to the applicant in writing within 30 days.
Okay. Does the county code regulate non-commercial messages?
Excuse me?
Does the county sign code allow signs with non-commercial messages?
Non-commercial?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Where?
In the county code for signs, there's 2 sections. There's a temporary sign for non-residential and a temporary sign for residential. In those 2 code sections, there is one exemption for one sign that's 10 feet tall. That's 32 square feet. And anything you want to put on it, you can put on it.
Okay. But in defining on-premise and off-premise signs, isn't it fair that the code restricts those signs to businesses?
The county code does restrict signage depending on what the zoning district is that you're in.
Right. But when you look at the definition, and I looked at it earlier with Mr. Wells, in defining off-premise sign, it's a message for a business, correct?
That is one of the sentences in the definition.
Okay. Are there any sentences in the definition that includes non-commercial content?
No.
Okay. What about on-premise sign? Are there any sections in that or sentences in that definition that includes non-commercial content?
No, there's not.
Okay. And is it also fair to say that in defining freestanding sign, the code says that off-premise signs cannot be freestanding signs? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And in the exemptions, we talked about flag or official insignia. Do official insignia signs also have to be pliable?
The code does not speak to that.
Okay. And is it fair to say that on some of Vision's applications, they sought official insignias on their signs?
I believe they did.
Okay. And you said if they took the word Vision, the logo, off the sign, that it still would not be permitted. Is that right?
That's correct.
Why?
The sign appears to exceed height limitations and size limitations for any type of signage that we have on premise or off premise.
Is there, in the exemption for official flags and insignias, is there any size or height limit?
No, there's not.
Okay.
Mr. Clace, can I interrupt you right here? Yeah. The board said they were willing to entertain additional time. He has like 10 seconds left. If he would make a request for additional time, I don't know how much longer you need. Now would be probably the time that you would.
Well, we would like additional time. I would say 5 minutes would be probably plenty. This is the last witness, correct?
Yes.
Okay. 5 minutes would be fine.
Wrap it up in 5 minutes?
Yes.
Board okay with that?
Okay.
Well, let's go right ahead.
All right.
And then we're going to take a break.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. Mr. Peterson, does the Cobb County Sign Code ban all signs that are not expressly allowed or mentioned in the code?
I don't believe so. It mentioned, but there's a section in the code that expressly prohibits certain types of signs.
Right. And if a McDonald's, okay, if I have a McDonald's and I want to put a new sign up, instead of advertising McDonald's on that sign, I want to advertise support the troops. Is that sign going to be allowed?
As long as the sign meets the county code as far as the height, the size, and the location.
But the height and size and location requirements are specifically limited to off or on-premise signs, is that right?
That's correct.
And then on-premise sign has to be a message advertising a business, as we looked at the definition earlier, is that correct?
Well, that's for an off-premise sign. Is that the one you're talking about?
Well, let's look at on-premise sign. It should be right in front of you there. On-premise sign means a sign containing a message for a business which is located on a lot that does contain or otherwise conduct the business for which is advertised.
Okay.
Okay, so on-premise sign, it has to have a sign containing a message for a business, right?
That's correct.
A non-commercial message would not fit the definition of on-premise sign. Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
Okay. We talked a little bit earlier about the, I'm looking at section 134.317 entitled Public and/or Private Business, Tourism, and Recreation Directional Signs. Is it fair to say that this section gives the Board of Commissioners the authority to allow additional signs for certain types of industries?
It does give the Board of Commissioners authority to approve additional signage for directional, for certain businesses and industries.
Is there any size or height limits on the signs that the Board of Commissioners can approve?
There's not any criteria in the section, but they do take the number of signs and the size into consideration when they're considering approving or denying an application for this.
Is it fair to say that as this section is worded, they could approve very large LED type signs for these specified businesses and industries if they wanted to?
Well, they're really supposed to be directional signs, so I'm not sure if they really need an LED sign for a directional sign, because normally they're up 24 hours a day. They don't change messages.
But humor me. If Six Flags wanted to build a new LED sign with the directing traffic off the exit to Six Flags, would this section give the county the discretion to do that if they decided it was appropriate?
It possibly could, but I believe that the sign of Six Flags had to get a zoning variance.
But they could have gone through this section too, had they so chosen.
It's a possibility.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have at this time. Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you.
Did the,
All right, before Mr. Peterson leaves us back to this board, we can ask Mr. Peterson questions. We'll start with Mr. Gunther.
Well, this is more a statement, and I guess, Mr. Peterson, you can answer this, I suppose. It seems to me that we're dealing with a lot of technical issues with respect to signs, and we're dealing with what appear to be maybe some errors, loopholes, inconsistencies, discrepancies, I don't know. But it appears that, you know, the case has been made that some things like that might be there, or some areas of interpretation that might be interpreted maybe several ways, I don't know. One way to get, if that in fact is the case, that there are inconsistencies or errors in the code, seems to me that one way to address it is to go through a process like we're doing right now. Another way, a more friendly way, is to go to you guys and zoning and say, as the keepers of the code, and say, we're trying to understand this. We have some issues. Help us. Are there changes of the code that need to be made, or are we misunderstanding it somehow? So my question is, if in fact that's another way to get these issues addressed, did that happen in this case?
Commissioner Gunther, yes, it could happen, and we typically do code amendments twice a year regarding
Right.
zoning. And it's typical for those issues to come up in this very room, either before the Planning Commission, or Board of Commissioners, or the Variance Board. And at those moments, you know, the staff does take notes, and we do try to fix the code where there are things that are not clear.
Okay, but in this case, no, they didn't come to you and say, we're trying to understand this, can you help us? Instead, we're here today through a formal process. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
All right, other questions, Ms. Williams?
Since you're over the sign division and all, do you think that your staff handled it in the correct way as per their understanding of the code, of the rejection of the applications?
For the most part, I believe my staff did handle it the correct way.
Thank you.
Ms. Monique?
I have a question regarding off-premises versus on-premises. A short while ago, the description for on-premises appeared to fit the description for off-premises based on what I'm looking at. So if you would, just kind of distinguish the two for me.
An on-premise sign is a sign that's constructed on a property and displays a message for the business that's on that property. An off-premise sign is a sign that's on a property that displays a message for a business that's not on a property.
Brian, do you have a question?
Mr. Chairman.
To follow up on Ms. Williams' question that started by Mr. Gunther's question, it seems to me, John, it's coming down to the technicality of the signs and the railroad and all that. That's an issue that we're not here to discuss. We're not here to determine. But the issue is you be the lead staff person for community development, and these folks here are working for you. And the question was asked directly, did you think your staff did a good job? And you answered in the affirmative, and I understand that. But in listening to both sides, the word 3-to-1 to take down, I think might have been a little confusing. This is my take on it. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I don't know if it was explained correctly to David or his folks. And I'm just wondering, could we have handled this thing a little bit better by taking a little extra time explaining the issues to these folks? Do you think that was done? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm trying to look for that give and take to see where we stand.
And thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And I wasn't present when these
Right.
interactions took place with Mr. Wells, Mr. Bates, and Mr. Jernigan. But I'm sure there's always room for improvement, no matter what you do.
Okay, I think that's a fair answer.
I do have one question, if I
Brian?
might, and we're so overwhelmed with paper right now, I can't see straight. So bear with me. But regarding the signage at somewhere at the Galleria and then Turner Field, the two where there were some exceptions made. Do those ever come up for bid? Or how is that set up?
Well, the properties that the signs are on that you're talking about are
Yeah.
on Exhibit and Coliseum Hall Authority property, and that's a state entity created by the Georgia General Assembly. So they're, the way we look at them is they're co-equals to the county, so that's why they're exempt from zoning as far as permitting their sign.
And they have their
Brian,
process.
for those of you that weren't around in the very beginning when the Exhibit Hall Authority and John Williams and Governor Barnes at that time was just an attorney and I was involved in that because I was involved with the Convention and Business Bureau. They were created by the legislature to get these entities going. I will say this, there was an outcry at the time on how much control they had, and there were no bids. It was entirely up to them. They could do whatever they wanted. And obviously with the Brave Stadium, it was handled the same way. There's been an outcry over that. The Braves never came in for any variances. It was a one complete zoning. There was a whole lot of stink about that, but that's an entirely other issue that we're not here to even talk about or think about. And I probably put both my feet in my mouth by saying that publicly, but that's the history behind it.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Are we ready to continue, or anybody want to take a little break?
I'm ready to continue.
Judy, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, let's keep going. Next. That's all the questions we have for Mr. Peterson. Thank you. Bill?
If I could have both counsel come to the sidebar, or I can just have a couple of
Sure,
questions. I have.
absolutely.
Can we call the question pretty soon?
Gotta let him finish.
I know.
Yeah, and then we'll call. Okay, we're ready to go.
Okay, I'll be as brief as I can, but I want to get a couple of things out here. I do want to state that I believe it's our opinion that the Cobb County sign code was properly enacted in accordance with the Georgia zoning procedures law. And it's also our position that the code as written is constitutional as a time, place, manner restriction. Obviously, those issues are not before you today, and I have submitted some additional documentation for the record as to Cobb's position on that, but I did want to state that as well. Vision contends that its submitted applications for sign types other than off-premises signs, and those signs should have been approved because they are allowed under the county code. However, the requested sign types do not meet the requirements for freestanding, directional, or official flag insignia signs as they were requested. The sign code begins with section 134.311, which lists several definitions used throughout the ordinance. It is important to note that the definitions do not include the specific requirements for each sign type. These requirements are found in the body of the code. And as both Mr. Wells and Mr. Peterson went through, the initial step that staff takes when reviewing a sign application is to look at whether the sign type requested, if the application fits that sign type requested. If it doesn't, then they look to see if it fits anything, because obviously it's not a simple code, and we want to give the applicant the benefit of the doubt. So they do look to see if it fits any other code. 6 of the applications submitted requested a freestanding sign. While the renderings included with the application appear to meet the definition in section 134.311, if you review the requirements in 134.314, the proposed sign does not meet the freestanding codes. The sign must be ground-based, the sign must meet the limitations set out in 134, and the height must not exceed 20 feet. As the renderings depict, these signs do not meet the requirements for a freestanding code. Additionally, 2 of the requested applications were for directional signage. And as we talked about, the definition is providing instructions for travel to or indicating the location of a place, or even whether by words, arrows, or other symbols. And again, there's additional requirements in the code section, the 317 and the 320 that we talked about. It states that the only directional signs that are allowed are those that are county Department of Transportation approved, owned, and maintained signs. A sign owned by a private party is not a DOT approved, maintained, and owned sign. It is confusing to note that one of the directional signs, as I discussed with Mr. Jernigan, the sign itself is listed as a directional sign, and it's also categorized as a freestanding sign. Obviously, there's some confusion in the definitions, and again, we rely on staff to walk through that. 3 of the applications requested official flag or insignia signs. Again, as Mr. Peterson discussed, the signs proposed do not meet the definitions of the exception. Next, Vision argues that the zoning ordinance does not apply to the railroad properties because they are not zoned. As Mr. Peterson indicated, the properties are zoned, and the sign code would apply to those properties. As to Vision's content argument, the county code allows for signs throughout unincorporated Cobb and does not regulate signage by content. As stated in section 134.312, the county code regulates signs by zoning district, height, location on lot, number, methods of construction, maintenance, or illumination. Vision argues that signs displaying non-commercial messages do not fall within the definition of off-premises signs because the definition states a message for a business, but it is not reading the entire definition. The second sentence specifically refers to billboards. This shall include, but not be limited to, those signs commonly referred to as billboards. Where the county code does not define a term, the plain and ordinary meaning defined by dictionaries is used. Here, the renderings clearly depict billboards as one would find them and know them by common usage. Regarding Vision's applications regarding the 4 applications that they state should be deemed approved, the county code states that upon receipt of a properly completed application, staff will examine and process the application. A completed application was never received from Vision for the sign at 4249 Roswell Road. While it was delivered, they were told that it was incomplete because it didn't have the 3-to-1 takedown information was discussed, and also further that it was an off-premises sign that was not allowed by the code. As Mr. Wells said, that would be a glaring deficiency in the code. Vision was told that the application would not be accepted, and the representative took it with him. On March 27th, 2018, 18 applications were received by Community Development via Federal Express. The application for 4249 Roswell Road was not included. Of the applications received, Community Development reviewed them all and in this case issued denials in accordance with the code. There's no reason to assume that Community Development would not have processed the application for 4249 Roswell Road if it had been submitted online as the 14 others. The railroad applications were received by Community Development on March 27th as well. Email notifications of denial were sent to, as we looked at, dennis@vision-outdoormedia.com. This is the address that was provided on the application itself. Section 134-371B details the ways that notice may be sent and the effective date of notice. Notice may be sent by email. In the code section, when using email, notice is effective at the time of emailing. Where the county code expressly delineates what constitutes sufficient notice, notice will be found sufficient if that process is followed. And that's YC Development, Inc. v. Norton, 344 Georgia Appeal 69. And while Vision states it did not receive the denial emails, it received 18 other denials for similar signs. It can be found that Vision had actual knowledge that the 3 railroad property applications were also denied. And in fact, Vision appealed these applications along with the other denials. The standard review for you today is to determine whether the community development staff abused their discretion in reaching the decisions on the permit applications. Staff reviewed the applications in compliance with the definitions and requirements of county code. Staff's decision to not accept an incomplete application was proper and also comports with the code. I ask that the board uphold the decision of the community development staff.
Board, if we may, speaking with counsel, Mr. Klaus has one additional minute, and there's just one clarification point we want to be able to make. If we have Mr. Jernigan take the stand.
Give it a second.
There? Okay, here we go. I apologize for not doing this earlier, but I forgot to swear Mr. Jernigan in when he testified. So I'm just going to say, Mr. Jernigan, is it fair to say that the testimony that you gave earlier was true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Okay.
And you reaffirm that, Mr. Jernigan?
Yes, I do.
Just raise your right hand, too. There you go. Now you're in.
Yes.
That's all.
Okay.
With that, now that each party has an opportunity for closing, you originally set it at 5 minutes. Is that what the board would like to see you do? Okay. Ms. Klaus, you can go first. Or you can reserve, and if you want to go at the end, either way.
I'll go first. First of all, I just want to address a point made by Mr. Gunther earlier. And we've sat down with the county on several occasions, and we've had encouraging, productive dialogues about various issues. So this isn't a situation where we're, not trying to work it out. We absolutely are, and I think Debbie would back that up.
I appreciate you saying that. It wasn't obvious to us, and so thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And so I just want to briefly summarize why the county staff's actions and inactions on the Vision application should be reversed. First, let's talk about the application. The first one that was submitted, that was walked in, 4249. She kept saying that it was an incomplete application. That is untrue. It was complete. Mr. Wells said it had, he didn't know of any materials it did not have. What they did was they denied it, okay? He walked in, he said, here's our application. He says, well, it's not allowed, it's denied, okay? And that's the same thing that happened with all the ones that were submitted online. Those were not rejected as being incomplete, saying it does not have this 3-to-1 requirement. Because as I understand the 3-to-1 requirement, it's you take down 3 static billboards, you get 1 LED billboard. That's what I understand it to be, and that's not what we're dealing with here. So that application was not incomplete. It was denied. It was never denied in writing. The code is clear, the testimony is clear that when they receive an application, they have 30 days to deny it in writing. If they don't, it's deemed to be approved. That's what should have happened here. With respect to the 3 railroad applications that we never received the denials on, it looks like the email address was incorrect, written down on the application. It's kind of odd that we received denials at the correct email address for all the other locations, but not for these. But, if that was our fault, so be it. Now, 8 applications were denied because they proposed off-premise signs, but the applications themselves plainly show that they are not off-premise signs. As we talked about, off-premise signs advertise businesses. That's what the code says, okay? And those applications did not necessarily advertise businesses. They sought freestanding signs, directional signs, official insignia signs. And now here they are backtracking from the basis of denial and coming up with new basis of denial here because they realize that the off-premise sign denial just does not cut it. That violates due process. We were entitled to get all of our bases for denial in a letter so we would have a chance to prepare an appeal and have a chance to dispute those, correct them if need be. And now that we're already through this process, they're trying to change the basis of denial, which is just, it violates due process. It's not allowed. 4 of the applications sought signs on unzoned railroad properties. Look, the map that we saw online shows the properties as not being zoned. He says that the official map shows them as being zoned. It's just not the information that we had. Several of the off-premise signs sought non-commercial messages. Again, testimony is clear, code is clear. Off-premise sign and on-premise sign does not encompass non-commercial messages, so those messages just aren't allowed. So what you have is a situation in the county where you can have business signs that are allowed, but you can't put non-commercial messages on the signs, and that's what makes the code unconstitutional. And so that's just a fundamental evidence and basis for our constitutional claims. Again, not something you can consider, but I had to get that on the record. We disagree on the ZPL issue. Again, not something that is really before you today. One decision which we did submit to you, which is attached to our appeal notices, is Tinsley Media versus Woodstock, which goes back to if the application was accepted, it was denied, it was not denied properly in writing, it's due to be granted. We had another case up in Woodstock where this exact same thing happened, and the judge ordered that the permits be issued because the city did not follow its own code in denying the application. That's what's due here. The board does have the power to correct, to determine whether the staff correctly applied the sign code. And I think as we've shown here today, there's been several instances where they did not correctly apply the sign code. They classified signs that were not off-premise signs as off-premise. We applied for some freestanding signs, and they say, well, they don't meet size and height requirements. This is a new basis for denial, but those size and height requirements only apply to on-premise signs. And again, on-premise signs are for businesses. These were not signs for businesses, so those requirements do not apply. So it is complicated. There's things they have to look at that they did not look at. Mr. Wells said they didn't review every specific application. They don't know what they said. I mean, they just kind of assumed they were all off-premise signs and denied them, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. We gave them the information they need to apply other provisions of the code, and they didn't do that. So want to thank you again for taking the time to hear this appeal. The signs proposed by Vision could provide substantial benefits to the owners of the property where the signs would be located, produce tax revenue, more advertising opportunities, and we would respectfully request that the erroneous denials of the applications be reversed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Blair?
Thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. There are many issues in this appeal, and while I hope that we provided some clarity for you, I'm not really sure. The question before you is whether community development staff properly applied the code as it is written. Testimony and an examination of the code show that staff properly applied the code. The proposed freestanding, directional, and flag signs simply do not meet the definitions set forth in the code. You heard from Mr. Peterson that the railroad properties are indeed zoned and subject to the sign code. As stated in section 134.312, the county code regulates signs by zoning district, size, height, location on a lot, number, methods of construction, maintenance, and illumination, not content. You also have proof that the county staff did take action and send written denials for the railroad properties. And because the application of 4249 was incomplete and did not comply with the code, it was proper to return it to the applicant pursuant to section 134-373. The standard of review to be applied today is whether community development abused its discretion, whether it erred in its application of the code. I ask that you uphold the decision of the community development staff. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Boring, is it back to us now?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. You have some thought. Mr. Gunther, strangely enough, does have a couple of thoughts that you'd like to introduce.
I'll just try to be very clear, or very, very short. To me, it seems like the staff, the community development staff, did in fact apply the code and the process in a correct way. So that's the main issue that we're trying to address today. But having said that, it doesn't appear to me that there was really very good, complete at least, communications as to why these were denied in all cases. And so that may be an area that the staff needs to, look at a little bit more carefully on how you communicate that. But and then the third point I want to make is that I know that there's a willingness on the part of community development to correct inconsistencies, areas that are fuzzy, areas that are confusing in the code, because I know that we sit on this board and we deal with, and in the Planning Commission, we deal with changes of the code all the time. For that, a lot of those changes come up for those reasons. So I would think that this is fertile ground for exploring maybe some changes to the sign code. Those are my three thoughts.
Good thoughts. Anybody else have any thoughts? We're in a position right now that there's a number of things we can do. One is we can decide this case today, right now. The other issue is we could go into executive session and come out and make a decision, or we can go into executive session, come out and say that we'll give a written notice within 30 days what our decision is. So I just throw this out. That's our choices, to see if anybody has any comment on any of those choices. Anything that you would like to do or not do, Mr. McDonald?
I would suggest executive session. I don't know that it needs to be long, but I'd like to have that opportunity before we render a decision if we could.
Anybody else? Monique, are you okay with that?
I'm
You
okay. Just need to
No other
digest.
comments? All right, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to adjourn for just a brief period of time, go into executive session. I'm going to take Mr. Boring with us, and we'll come right back out. Thank you. Okay, we're back from our break. This is the Cobb County Board of Zoning Appeals. Just before we went into executive session, I had a verbal agreement here, but I neglected on taking a vote. So if somebody'd like to make I'll entertain a motion to go into executive
Is it
session.
retroactive?
We'll make it retroactive.
Since I had suggested, I'll make the motion then that we have that executive session for
Got a
few
motion?
minutes.
I'll second.
I've got a second, Monique, and again, I emphasize the fact that I didn't have a verbal commitment. So we'll all vote to either go into executive committee or not. So we're voting 5-0. We have gone in and we have now come out of our executive session. At this time, I guess the thing to do is I'll just entertain a motion to see where we are on our hearing. Mr. Gunther?
I'd like to make a motion that the staff properly applied the code and the approval process and did not abuse its discretion in that process.
Got a motion? I've got a second. Second, Ms. Williams. Call for comments. No comments. We'll just call for the vote. All in favor signify or vote no. Madam Secretary, this board finds for the county with a 5-0 vote. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our business for today. Thank you very much for coming. And I might say go Braves, so we'll all pray for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We don't need to keep.